today changes my whole entire life.
Welcome to Gritability, a podcast about the power of perseverance, overcoming seemingly insurmountable odds to attain the life of your dreams. I'm your podcast host, Ro Clausen. With me in the studio today is the beautiful and ever radiant Ro Clausen.
Hello, I'm excited to be back. I feel like I've been missing the studio for a couple of weeks. And I think this is my first in-person, we have an in-person guest in this room. And I can't think of anybody better to have my first in-person podcast with. Say that 10 times fast.
Yes, well, you did it beautifully, as always. With us today here in the studio is my good friend, Jonathan Machado.
How are you, Adam? Thanks for having me, Ro.
Man, we are so excited to have you here today. And I really wanted to kick this off by, as Ro and I were talking earlier, about thinking back. It's been a couple years now that you and I have known each other.
Right.
And what first came to mind is how we met. Unusual place for, individuals like us having a shared background.
Right.
We met at a courthouse.
Yeah, it was fun. It was
Sounds like a blast.
Yeah. It was an interesting invite. I was reached out by a caseworker from an organization regarding speaking in front of a panel for Leadership Las Vegas regarding, I think it was Criminal Justice Week, right? And they wanted some people to share their background. And I show up, and I remember Adam showing up early as usual, right? And for some reason I said, I'm pretty sure that guy's going to be on the panel too. And sure enough, we sat next to each other. I heard a bit of a story, very inspiring, right? Motivating. I shared my story, and then we just naturally gravitated towards each other.
Man, well, I was telling Ro about this in the car, and I don't know if I had ever really shared this part of it, but that day when we were, sharing our stories, sitting on that panel, there's still times where I get a little bit nervous. Greatest fear I ever had to overcome was public speaking. And in order to do the things that I really wanted to do, it was something that I worked on very hard. But being in that room for, as you said, for Leadership Las Vegas, these are people who are prominent people within this community. I mean, movers and shakers, right? And we're up there, being completely vulnerable, opening up, sharing our stories. And I don't think I ever told you this, but when I was listening to your story, man, it touched me in a way where I was like, I need to get to know that guy better. And it wasn't just what you were saying, man, it was the passion that you had. It was how authentic, transparent, like those are traits that when I see them in someone and they're genuine, like that's what I gravitate towards. I felt your energy and I was like, listen, before we leave here today, I got to get to know this guy.
Right. Yeah, it was a similar experience. You had some insight that I was very unfamiliar with, right? What the struggles you faced, but seeing what you had overcome, right? And where you were today and how much you were determined to continue the good fight, so to speak, right? And advocate for reducing recidivism and reentry and making. And oddly enough, here in Nevada, right, in Las Vegas, it was, in my mind, what better place for me to be than right next to this individual that has this powerful story that's advocating or passionate about the same things that I am. So it was pretty awesome. And I think what got us together was you work out, and he's like, yeah, I do CrossFit. I was like, I'm down, let's do it. And we did the Phoenix, we met John, and it was awesome. Yeah, we shared our visions, right? After a CrossFit session with John, and I remember telling what I wanted to accomplish. You're like, man, that's very much similar to what I'm trying to do on a much grander scale. I don't think you use those words, but I saw it, right? It was very much larger than what I had envisioned, but nonetheless, it was centered in being of service to those that are in our position, and carving that path, ensuring that they have a clear way to get, how would I say, not just survive, but seeing that success is possible.
Mm. Well, that conversation that started on the courthouse steps, after that event has continued. I mean, it's a couple years later.
Yeah.
We took it to the top of the mountain. We've been to all sorts of
Right.
different places. And those visions that we shared, man, in those couple of years, we've done some amazing things. And I really want to highlight, the success that you've had. But I also want to let all of our viewers know, where you came from. Because when we talk about gritability, that's what it's all about. Overcoming those like incredible challenges. And there were some things that you shared with us recently when we were together that I didn't even know, things from your youth.
Right.
Yeah, so I barely knew how you guys met. I completely forgot. And when we were at your house recently, you were telling us a story about how when you were little, you had to, and I might be botching this, so I'm going to need you to fix it, but you had to commute two
Right.
different countries back and forth. I believe you said between Mexico and California, right, for school.
Correct.
And you were telling this story, and the way you articulated it was so beautiful about how your parents tried to teach you that you had to kind of bend the truth in order to do this. You had to say you were living with your aunt. Obviously, they wanted to get you this great education, but you also learned at a very young age that kind of like lying was okay. And I believe I didn't let you finish telling that story in the moment because I made a joke and took it in a different direction because that's what I do. And I would love for you to not only tell that story, but to kind of finish that story and explain, because like you have to be a very resilient person to do that as an adult, let alone as a child, day in and day out.
Right. It's so when I started in the public school system, we were living in Mexico, in Tijuana, and we were going to a school in San Diego. And it was normal seeing my brothers get up for school. I was super excited to go to school. And I remember my mom having the conversation with me, and she's like, "Hey, by the way, there's certain things we need to discuss, right? Like, this is your address. Memorize this address, right? Memorize this phone number. And if anybody ever asks you, like, where you live, you tell them you live at this address, this phone number, this is where we work." And I'm thinking to myself, like, of course, I'm not questioning my mom, but bottom line, she's like, you need to say that in order to go to school, or else they won't let you, right? And she's like, and school is great, right? You want this education? I'm like, yeah, right. I want to go to school. I want to be like my older brothers and participate in the same things they're doing. So in the moment, I knew it was bending the truth, but there was a reward for it, right? This education. So without them knowing, they instilled this idea in me, being so young, impressionable, that there's going to be instances where it's necessary. At least at that point in my mind, I thought that it was necessary that I'm going to have to bend the truth in order to, right, in this case, go to school or get those things that are worth getting. So I know, thinking back, it was never their intention, right? I believe they did the best they could with what they had available. And I'm fortunate now to look back at it and see where I possibly would have done things differently, right? But nonetheless, it afforded me the opportunity to go to school in San Diego. And there was actually an incident where my brother commented to his friend that we were living in TJ, and a teacher overheard. So they called us into the office. They pulled us out of class. They called my mom from work, and she had to come and kind of say my brother was lying, right? Or it was a joke. And they wanted like bills to prove that we resided, right? So there was this whole elaborate behind the scenes happening, right, for my family, where my mom was paying like a phone bill, her other sister was paying a different bill, and they were all coming to the same address so that all of us can go to school in the US. So my mom managed to put their minds at ease, right, that we resided there, and they allowed us to continue to go to school. But it was like this is why you don't say it, right? And we came back, we would wake up 2 a.m. in the morning, and by the time we'd get home, it would be like 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
Yeah, and do it every day, Monday through Friday.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I'm like, as a mom, if it was the best thing for my son, I don't know that I would do it differently. I don't know. I can't answer that for you, but I can totally relate and not relate, but understand where your parents were coming from because, I mean, it was an education for their children. I get it.
Right. And thinking back, having faced some of the struggles I faced, I think to myself, like, man, my parents came, if the life that they wanted was attainable in their country or their in Mexico, they would have not been or put themselves through what they went through just to get here, right? To ensure that their kids were born in this country so that they had access to insurance, to public schooling, right? In Mexico, the schools are all private. So when I was facing the struggles that I faced with a drug addiction and in and out of prisons, I thought to myself, like, man, what a waste of their energy, right? That here I am, like nothing to show for it. Luckily, the light bulb turned on eventually, right? And here we are.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I mean, Adam and I have this conversation because of the amount of time that he spent in prison as well. And I think that it's that foundation that both of your parents built that allowed you to, you know, make your mistakes and be boys and get yourself in trouble. But you were able to come out the other side and you're both living such beautiful lives. I mean, you have a beautiful fiance, a beautiful family. Yeah. And I believe it's that foundation and those morals that were set by your parents at that young age that helped you come back around to it. Because some people are often, they're still running in their 40s, 50s, 60s.
Yeah, you're right. It's I'm super grateful. I understand now. It's even though to some people my childhood might have been somewhat extreme, it fails in comparison to what my parents face as children, which fails in comparison to what their parents face. So instead of trying to chase the villain, right, or find out who am I going to point the finger to, it's deciding, you know what, this is it. This is as far as that generational pain is going to go, and it's time to do something different.
And that's exactly what we talk about. That is a gritty mindset because it's just your reframe and the way that you choose to look at that. It's your perspective. And I love that because how many people play the victim forever and they blame their parents for what they didn't have or whatnot. So I love that. You were going to say something?
I was going to say, most people do. Kind of to continue that, I love the whole Ed Milet, like, be the one. Be the one in your family to change, like to change the entire trajectory of that lineage, man. And that's what I'm hearing. That's what I see in you. You know what I mean? Like from the moment that you and I had this first conversation, I mean, I told you there was something that attracted me to you. And like, I'm not surprised at what you were able to overcome at a young age, but I am always curious, like to know those defining moments, to hear that story. To me was like, okay, I get it. But I'm sure there's other things. Like, what else from your youth early on, before you got caught up in everything else? Like, you know, Ro puts it very mildly that, you know, we were boys and got into a little bit of trouble.
Right.
Boys, you know, get called into the principal's office. This was a little bit more dramatic.
I'm sorry I called you boys.
Well, I'm saying we've spent some time away. It was a little bit more extreme. So our mistakes were a little bit bigger. However, I'm sure there were some moments, some defining relationships early on in your life that kind of molded you, made you who you were.
Yeah, and I remember one, I would say I was about I would say like 10 years old, and my parents had bought their first house. We're now living in San Diego. And my dad, he worked at the shipyard down in San Diego. And he came home one day, and as a child, right, your parent is your hero, right? Sure. The sun rises because dad said so, you know, and there's food on the table because dad makes sure there's food on the table. So one day I remember my dad coming home and I told him, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be like you. right? I want to work where you work. And he got upset and he looked at me and he's like, no, you can't do what I did. You can't work where I work. You got to be better. So unknowingly to him, he shattered that superhero image of himself to a child, right? Who was like, what do you mean, right? You are the alpha, right? You're the beginning and the end, right? Everything goes through you, and you're telling me I need to be better. Well, where's my example, right? It's not you, so now I got to look for it outside of home, and that's where you start to. Well, I started to look at, like the saying goes, you don't choose your father, but you choose your father figure, right? So if my dad said I had to do better, well, what is better? I had to define that at a very young age. Well, if I can't do that, then what do I have to do? And who's my role model, right? And I found one, of course, in the worst place, right? But it was different than what was at home. But being the first generation U.S. citizen, there was no rule book for the most part. Is like join the military, and that's what my brothers did, right? That's the exit strategy. Like come to the U.S., join the military, and you're set. But there was nothing else. There was no resources readily available, right? And the only thing we had was this counterculture that was wrongly idolized on TV, right? The Chicano culture or the gang culture, and you gravitate towards that because, or at least I did, because I didn't fit in, so to speak, and my dad's telling me I need to do something different than him. So that's where that began, right? Very young, I would say 10 years old. Yeah.
Wow.
I love this. I love where this is going because I thought it was going to take a different direction when I asked that first question. That's why I asked it. But I'm getting, just as a parent, I'm getting so much out of this episode. I love this.
Well, I think we're getting to the point now where that transition happened. You're outside of the house. You found the wrong influence, right?
Right.
Tell us where that was, kind of what happened, and what set you off on the path that ultimately led to, man, so many years of additional struggle and challenge, which I'm sure that's not what your parents had in mind for you.
Right. Definitely not. It's so going back around 10 years old, despite being the first in our family, both in my mom and dad's sides of the family, who owned a home and lived on this side of the border, they looked at us like, man, the world was ours, even though we faced a lot of struggles internally at home. My dad battling alcoholism and poor financial decisions. So my mom got involved with full-time job. I mean, she always worked odd jobs. She'd clean people's houses, do things like that. And then when she noticed the 30-year mortgage, right, she's like, I need to play my part that much more aggressively. And so she very much got involved in working and started taking hold of the finances. So I noticed a lot of the troubles at home stemmed from the lack of or misuse of money, right? So in my mind, education served no purpose. I thought to myself, if I had money, my mom wouldn't cry to sleep at night. You know, if there was money, then we didn't have to worry about, what we're gonna eat tomorrow. And even though my parents did their best to ensure to try to hide that, I was the youngest, so I was just watching everything, right? And I'm grateful for their struggle, but it sent mixed signals, right, as a youth. So in that neighborhood in San Diego, I saw the people who had money, right? And it was the ones doing all the things you shouldn't be doing. So I gravitated towards that. And I went from mowing lawns to selling drugs, right? Very quickly. And because it was more of a return on my investment, right? So that to me was security, was that money, right? Not education, despite having teachers say, you really can, you can succeed in your education, because they saw something in me. I was so focused on the right now, right, on the instant gratification, right, of obtaining money and solving the problem, and it really led to more problems.
Sure. And this is going to sound like a bizarre question, but did you have success in that time where were you able to like help pay the bills or?
Oh no, in no way was I able to disclose anything that I was doing to my mom. She was still very traditional Catholic raised, right?
Sure.
So my brother, there was a distraction, right? And the distraction was the failing marriage between my parents that allowed me to operate under the radar, so to speak. And I would still ask my mom for $20 on the weekend, even though I had a means. I had to hold up appearances.
Sure.
So it wasn't. I took it upon myself to feel as though I needed to do something. It was never asked of me, right? And then in the end, it never went towards anything good. It never helped anybody. It just set me on a path of a lot of struggle, a lot of pain.
Yeah. Okay, so now you're involved with selling drugs and you're making a little bit of money, and you said there was pain. Where was the downfall?
The downfall would say 22 years old, I went to the first time I was in custody. And in those, I did 45 days before I saw the judge. Or I saw the judge and they gave me like 30 days. In those 30 days, my parents had successfully finalized their divorce and sold the home.
Wow.
So here I am in the county jail, downtown San Diego, and my dad visits me independently from my mom, and he's like, hey, this is going on. And he's like, but I'm with somebody. I said, well, good for you, Dad, right? I'm happy that you're happy. As long as you're happy, you're always going to be my dad. You don't need to be with my mom to be my dad. And then separately, my mom and my brother came, and my mom's like, I met somebody. I said, good for you, Mom, and I was genuinely happy for them. Now, when I was released after that, 22 years of my life were in 2 trash bags, right? Those big, black, hefty 50-gallon bags. And they're like, figure it out, right? Wow. And at that point in time, that was a pivotal moment. At that point, I could have rearranged my life, right? I had every opportunity to do so, but it was much more easy to do what I already knew how to do, right? And stay in that world and use that as a crutch, right? Like, oh, my parents left, or my dad wasn't there, or he was an alcoholic, or there was abuse, and I don't have a home, and this is why I'm struggling. So I used every excuse, right? Or I tried to hold on to everything instead of taking ownership and saying, this is my life now, and I need to take control of it. Nobody's going to come save me, right? Like I'm an adult. I'm 22 years old, so I wish that would have happened. I don't regret it not happening, but.
Did you feel like an adult at 22 years old? Because that's young, man. It's so young.
No, not at all. It's funny because I watch cartoons now because I feel like I didn't have a childhood.
Wow.
Yeah, like I missed out on so much. Like I watch anime. That's my little refuge to myself. Like I won't watch all the TV shows, right? The drug trafficking and all that, because they idolize something that really they know nothing about, and it's just so painful, right? And seeing families impacted by the mafia that are kidnapping people. I've lost countless family members to that. So I choose to, it brings back a lot of hurt, right? So to me, it's upsetting that they glorify it, right? But now I watch cartoons.
I love that. And my last question in my phone, but I want to ask it now because I feel like it fits, is you've always come across to me as the eternal optimist. Like you always flip things positive when I hear you guys on the phone. And just exactly what you were saying about your parents, good for you, I'm happy you're happy. Where do you think you developed that?
I would say it started at home, right? At home, despite what was going on around, there was a strong religious foundation, right? So I was introduced to a higher power very young, and whether I chose to ignore that higher power, it was always there when I needed it, right? And just this last time, what happened to me is I was actually at CCDC awaiting sentencing, and I was doing a prayer walk in the module. This is like 2 a.m. in the morning, right? And I'm talking to God, and he's responding to me. And I remember telling him, I'm like, man, how come every time I'm here, I can hear you? Right? And he responded, he said, Jonathan, when you're in the world, you're of the world.
Ooh.
Right? So you're more concerned with worldly things. And all I want is a relationship with you. So if I have to keep you here to have a relationship with you, I will. I said, well, I can hear you now. We don't got to go that far. I get it. So, and I held on to that. Right? And thankfully, because I had that upbringing, despite everything that was going around, there was that religious foundation, right? The Catholic religion was there for me. So that's what allows me to stay optimistic.
Wow, what a
Yeah.
beautiful story. And we're going to come back to this, but I just skipped a whole chunk. So you did 30 days, but now you're in
Right.
CCDC awaiting sentencing. What transpired in between?
Oh, between there, I had a son, right? And that was an amazing experience. I was 24 years old, had my first son, only son, and I remember having that mindset that nothing is going to derail me from being there for my child, right? And then to think that what I would be willing to do to ensure that he had a life better than my own is almost scary, right? Because there's nothing. And then I was in a relationship with my mother's son. I was still very much of the world. I was still indulging, smoking marijuana and drinking, trying to juggle both being a father, working a regular job, and that lifestyle, right? Thinking that was part of my identity. And as any sane person would, they'll draw the line, right? And she did. She drew the line and said, you know what? You're continuing down a path that I do not want to see my son involved in, right? And that was the second opportunity that I could have changed my life, right? And instead, I used it as a crutch, right? I said, oh, I blamed everything on her taking my son, and because he was everything to me. So I had now a new excuse, and I held on to that. That led me back to prison, right? Making foolish mistakes, involved in even heavier drugs, because I now had a void that I couldn't fill. That's my child. And alcohol and marijuana were not enough, right? So I went to a heavier drug, right? Crystal meth, and it didn't fill the void. It just distracted me enough to continue, right? So land back in prison, or in jail. I get out. I try to do the right thing, and these are the struggles that I noticed this last time around, right? Is there wasn't enough resources to help me transition, right? It's just like, here's your PO. You come in every 30 days. You pee in this cup, and we'll see you in 30 days. So it was tough, right? Working minimum wage, and then couch surfing between families and friends, and no real support, nothing to lean on. So quickly you become, or at least I felt, as a burden. So I didn't want to feel that. Excuse me. So you go back to what you think you know, right? And what's safe. Oddly enough, it was the most dangerous thing to do, but it was safe because it was my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Right? So I ended up moving to south of the border in TJ, where I linked up with the wrong crowd again, and then I found myself in federal prison. And in federal prison, I was sentenced for attempted importation of illegal substance through the port of entry, and I'm there for a substantial amount of time, thinking to myself, like, are you done? And as much as I thought I was, I wasn't. Right, well, still some field research left to do, so to speak. Right, because oddly enough, you're there and you're around some significant people in that world, right, who have made significant impact in that underworld, and they fill your head with these ideas like, oh man, you can still do this, right? And I came out, tried to do it again, but I didn't have no real support. It was just myself, and that quickly led me back to what I knew, and with I came out to Vegas with the sole intention of committing crime. Right, that was the whole reason why I came out to Vegas. And then my higher power showed up one day with a gun and a badge, right? Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And then that's where I had that prayer walk, and had the opportunity to finally, right, at 33 years old, make a decision to, I was done. My best ideas had gotten me there. I was literally at the end of my rope. And I wanted something I never had. And I thought to myself, I know how to fail pretty well. Actually, I'm a successful failure, all right, but I've never succeeded. I don't know what that's like. So if I died today, I can't say I've tried everything, because the only thing I haven't tried is the right thing, right? So if that fails, well, I know how to do that. So I don't have to be afraid of that. So I made my mind up to do something different, and it's been the most amazing journey. I've got to meet some amazing people and make an imprint in my community and help individuals, right? Some twice my age, some half my age, right? And it's been amazing.
Well, that was quite a summary of time in there. And I know that there was a lot that you went through during that period. And I'm a firm believer in what we go through, we grow through. You know what I mean? It's our experiences that shape us and make us who we are. And I've also seen that it takes something different for everyone, right? Like everyone gets to the end of that rope at a
Right.
different point. The unfortunate reality is some people never get there. But you hit that point, you make a decision, and I'm going to do things different. Where do you get your start? Because you said, and I can totally relate about coming out and feeling like there's no support there. That's what led me right back to prison. So I understand that part. I came out this time with like unbelievable support. Obviously, Ro was literally most of the time holding my hand, right, through that whole process. I can't imagine having gone through it and wow, as navigated it as successfully as I did without her. I just can't even conceive that. And then I had family, I had built other supports because I was in for a long time. So I attribute all of them with me becoming who I am today because I had that support system. So you didn't have that in the past, but you make this decision. I'm going to live a different way. I'm going to try something new. Tell me how that works out, because I know you as who you are now.
Right. You're lucky. Blessed. I gotta say, Las Vegas, man, I never thought I was gonna come here and accomplish the things I did, but oddly enough, the drug court program, because that's what gave me the opportunity to get out, right? Is I had openly admitted that I had a drug problem. Everything, all the crimes that I committed, whether at the time I acknowledged them or not, was to sustain my drug habit, right? So I had this moment of clarity, right? Without knowing, I worked my first step, right? Admitting that I was an addict. And the judge, and I wish I could have thanked her in person. She's since retired, and I graduated during COVID, but she asked me, when I went to sentencing, she was ready to give me 4 years due to my criminal past, right? Habitual criminal history. And I remember saying, Your Honor, like, I have a drug problem. She's, oh, really? Are you interested in this intensive outpatient program? And I'm like, yes, right? And it was it was a genuine yes. Like I wanted something different. And she said, okay, somebody will speak with you, right? We'll come back. We'll bench this and we'll come back. So I got interviewed while in custody, and during the interview, I'm smiling, and I remember being asked, like, "Why are you so happy?" Right? And I'm like, "Well, because this is another step closer to, getting out of here and doing something different." So they gave me a new date, like for 2 weeks later, and then my public defender shows up 2 weeks later, and he says, "Your application's been denied."
Oh no.
And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You have sales charges, right? You have more than just possession. You have sales charges. So this is for people who have an addiction problem. We're not trying to put foxes in the hen house," is the term they used. And I was like, "Oh, well, so what can I do?" He's like, "Nothing. Let's just go see what the judge says." So we go in there, and Judge Ellsworth, I hope she doesn't get mad by me mentioning her name, but she sees me and she says, "You were denied." She said, "But I have the final word, right? I am in charge of the specialty court program, and something tells me that I'm going to give you a shot, so I am going to have my eye on you, right? Because due to your past, like you don't fit the criteria, but I am going to give you an opportunity." So I said, "Thank you," right? And I remember going back in, and you have the county blues on, and it has the CCDC imprinted on the top and on the bottom. And I remember a guy telling me, he's like, "You know what CCDC stands for?" And I was like, "What's that?" He's like, "Can't complete drug court. Like it's a setup. You're gonna fail." So I took that as a personal challenge, right? Like, you're not gonna tell me I'm gonna fail, right? So I said, "Okay." Luckily, I would say right after the holidays, I was released in January, and I told myself, "All right, man, you're in a place, you have no family here, right? You have all your family is going to be skeptical of the change, right? Because you've invested 30 years in becoming this person, and now all of a sudden you're going to try something different. So don't be surprised if they're not receptive to this new change, right? But lean into this program." And that's what I did. I came out with an open mind, right? And they grafted a new idea. They said, "You need support. You need AA or NA. You need a sponsor. You need to go to meetings." I said, "Okay," and I was willing. And it was a lot of walking, a lot of learning the bus system, but luckily, right, Las Vegas has some great public transportation. They run depending on what line, every 15 minutes, right? And on the weekend, 30 minutes, as opposed to San Diego's like every hour.
Ooh.
So
Shout out to the RTC.
yes, for real.
RTC's doing a good job. We're
They're
looking
doing
for
a great
sponsors.
job, yes. So I leaned into the program. I found a sponsor. I worked steps, and I showed up when I didn't want to, right? But I kept telling myself, I want something I've never had. Right? I need to do something I've never done. And there was a possibility that I could succeed, right? Something I've never had. So why not give it a shot? So I did, and I progressed, and people were dropping like flies. Sure enough, right? The people that weren't ready, that they were just saying lip service just to get out of custody, they're quickly relapsed, right? And I played the tape all the way through. Like I know where that would lead me, and I was just tired of that. That wasn't a life that I want to live anymore. So that made me more resilient. It gave me more grit and more determination to say, I know what's waiting for me on the other side of that. So I'm not willing. I don't know what's behind this door, right? It can be a life beyond my wildest dreams, and it has become that, right? Luckily, and I don't attribute that to luck. Actually, that's just faith in the process and doing your due diligence. So, yeah, I leaned in, and 10 days before graduation, I was working for a gentleman. And every morning it was a routine. You call the drug testing line, right, to see if your color's been called. And at the end of every night, I would recap my day, make sure I called who I needed to call, and they closed at 9 o'clock. And that day I worked past 9, 10 days before my graduation. And I'm sitting in my car and it's 9:15 p.m. And I go through my recent calls and I was like, oh my God, I didn't call the drug testing line. I said, what are the odds of them having called my color today? And I called and they did. So I missed I missed it. And I said, okay, well, what can I do? There's nothing I can do other than show up tomorrow and test, right? Because it's zero tolerance. You miss a UA, you get remanded. So I said, okay, I'm gonna take the remand. I was prepared for that, but what I didn't want them is to be questioned my sobriety. I wanted to go on record that I was clean, right? That it wasn't a relapse. It was just, unfortunately, it escaped me 10 days prior. So I went in and Judge Ellsworth was upset because I went and tested when I shouldn't have, right? Because the court is paying for all of this. But she said, thank you for doing that. Nonetheless, we're going to remand you for 48 hours. When would you like to come and turn yourself in? This is the first time in my life I've ever been asked when I want to turn myself in, right? So I was like, well, how about this weekend, And she's like, okay. And I went, and it was the first time in my life being in custody, not under under the influence of anything. And it was a much different experience, right? It was very eye-opening, where in the past, that initial intake process, I was always not in the right state of mind. It felt like, how can I say, it was combative, right? Because you're the inmate, and then the CEOs, they're the enemy, right? So it was very, I don't want to be here, and of course they know you don't want to be here, so you're fighting these guys. And this time around, I went in and it was like, man, these guys are just doing their job. Like, this guy is probably married, has a family. Like, why am I making his life difficult, right? And it was not a bad experience at all, actually, right? I went in, I knew what made it easy was that I knew I was getting out.
Yeah.
Right? That makes a huge difference, because I knew Sunday evening I am going to be back home. But it was a fresh perspective, right? Because I didn't have all that outside clutter, outside noise from the substances, or that environment, that culture, right? Counterculture that I was living with inside of me, clouding up my judgment.
I do want to back up. I want to focus on that for a minute, because being on intensive testing, that sort of supervision, I don't think most people understand what it's like to live under that level of scrutiny, the stress that creates. I know she does, because again, she was holding my hand through that process. And when I got out here, I was on intensive monitoring, where sometimes it was a couple times a week. We actually just did a video about this. Man, that was stressful.
For both of us.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah.
you knew it, because she would be like, did you call? Did you call and check today? And I'd be like, oh God, let me go. When you said go through my call log, and there'd be times where it would like catch, I'd be like, oh my God, I forgot to call. And I'd be holding my breath like, God, don't let me have missed this. Don't let me have missed this. Getting off of that, being released from that testing, was almost like getting out of prison.
I bet.
It was that same level. You were right there with me.
Well, I've never been in prison.
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Well, right.
So as you were telling me that, like, I was right there with you, and I'm like, oh man. And to have to go back for that 48 hours, your mindset, the way that you just acknowledged it, the way that your perspective over all of it, I want to highlight that. And I also want to highlight the fact that even you ending up in that program is a result of you standing up there in those blues that said CCDC.
Right.
That judge saw something more. She saw past that prison garb. She saw something in you. It's the same thing that I saw in you. And the reality is, certain people just have a different energy. There's something within them that's different. And to acknowledge that you have it
Thank you.
and that it's being channeled now towards some amazing things. And I do want to kind of transition over to, because we talked about all the challenges, but you said about being of service. And I'd really like to talk about that.
Before you transition, though, I was going to say the exact same thing, but also I want to acknowledge your judge, because if your judge, Adam's judge that signed your compassionate release, there's a line in the sand, right? And Judge Ellsworth and Judge, I can't remember his name right now,
Papert, sorry.
They displayed empathy and compassion.
Right.
And they gave you your second chances, where that is, I mean, it can make me cry because that's huge. They did see something in you.
Right.
But also they saw just a person to a person, which is amazing. And real basic, the fact that you turned yourself in over a weekend for 48 hours just shows how far you had come out of your addiction, because it was a weekend.
Right.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to not forget that before we transition.
No. That was great.
It was. Yeah, no, I didn't get the opportunity. We didn't have a formal graduation because COVID happened the following year. So I'll use this as my opportunity, right? Judge Ellsworth, I am extremely grateful for that opportunity. It has allowed me to be here today, to accomplish things I didn't think possible. And it was thanks to you seeing that in me and giving me that opportunity. And the district court, right, drug court, that program, I'm super grateful for it. And it's that acronym, Can't Complete Drug Court, is for those that don't want it, right? Because if you want it, the resources, Nevada, they have them, right? And it's very possible. And you just got to want it. So thank you again, Judge Ellsworth.
And
We'll make sure she gets that, because we have a former judge who listens to the podcast.
Nice.
we're definitely going to pass that along. And to Judge Ellsworth, what are you most proud of accomplishing since completing that program?
Most proud of accomplishing. So I used that program, the fact that I was in that program, as a level of accountability that most people didn't have when I was applying for work, right? So I would go to these interviews and I would disclose my background, and then I tell them, look, man, I have a level of accountability that far exceeds Joe Schmo, right? Like, I have a caseworker, I have a probation officer, I have a judge, I have a sponsor, I have all these things that are holding me accountable to ensure that I succeed, right? Like, you are not gambling by bringing me into your organization. You're getting a candidate that has this level of respect for themselves, right? And has to answer not just to you, the employer, right? But to all these other agencies, right? And organizations. And I would use that as a sales point, right? And it was true, though. It was pretty awesome.
I love that.
Well, I know, because I've been there to see you in the workplace, the people that you lead, the respect that you have from all of those who are within your care. Like, in the workplace and in life, I've always been very, very impressed with that.
Thank you.
I know a lot of people who watch, you see the books back here. You know, I've had a lot of books that have influenced me. I know that you are very much in line with me on that. If you had to pick one book, what book would that be?
Extreme Ownership.
Okay.
By Jocko
Willink.
There you go.
Yep.
I would have butchered his last name. But yeah, there was.
I didn't know he had a last name.
He really doesn't. You can just,
Right, Jocko. Yeah. There was a lot of books before that, but that specific book in regards to leadership, right, was quintessential in ensuring that I showed up well for those that I was leading, helping manage, right? There's such a huge responsibility, and that would be one of my biggest accomplishments since drug court, would to be in a position of leadership, right? Where others' success and were intertwined with my own, right? So that book gave me something um, that I've heard a million times, but the way he worded it using combat experience, right, and relating it to business, it's like, oh my God, this totally makes sense, right? And just owning your space, owning your destiny, right? Owning your mistakes, owning your victories as well, right? And then sharing that with those around you, humanizing myself, right? To ensuring that I'm not on this pedestal where I'm above, right? That's been an amazing book for sure.
I was going to say, you've not only, I've seen you, within the success that you've had, not only within leadership, but also within ownership. I'm excited because I think that we're going to have a big announcement here shortly. I see great things for you in the future. So your leadership journey, I believe, is only just beginning. But I also want to highlight the fact your ownership as an entrepreneur.
Right.
Like I said, I definitely want to highlight that because you're not only an owner, it's about you being of service, using
Yes.
your experiences. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So while in drug court, I noticed there was a portion of that where I was living in a transitional living facility. And there was another gentleman that was actually going through the program at the same time I was. We didn't know each other yet, but he was in a different facility. And the way it was managed, it felt as though, like I understood the comments, right? What can't complete drug court, it made sense to me because there was, we were sardine jam packed into these living quarters, right? And with all these demands or expectations on us with no real support, right? So I said, man, and then I'm hearing numbers, right? Like what they're charging. For instance, the organization I was with, they made it seem as though they were there to help. So the grant funding allowed for paying for the housing for the first initial 120 days for the participant in the specialty court program. After those 120 days, the goal is that you're pretty self-sufficient or at least well on your way to, pay your own rent. So this organization I was in, they I remember there would be people that maxed out their grant funding and they would say, "Oh no, don't worry, you can stay here until you find, employment. Don't worry about it." And they would rack up these charges or expenses, right? I believe it was $925 a month.
Ooh,
Yes, to
okay.
share a room between four people in one room,
Yeah.
and a room designed as a seat for one person,
Yeah.
right, is now for four. And after like 30 days, they're like, "So, are you gonna pay?" So, well, I haven't found my job, and they would use that as leverage against you, and they would even go to the courts and put you on non-compliance, and people would even go back to jail,
Oh man.
right? So I was like, "Oh my God, this is not where I want to be." So I quickly myself, I found employment, and I moved out before my grant funding ran out.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, but I saw that it could be done better. You don't want to leave an institution to go into an institution,
Mm-hmm.
right? If the goal is to make me a productive member of society and transition into society, then I need that safe space to do that. So while in drug court, I met this amazing individual who we would ride the bus together to go drug tests to ATI. And I remember sharing a little bit background about myself. He shared a little background about him and about himself. And then I told him I had this idea, right, of getting involved in three-quarter housing. And he's like, "Oh yeah, that would be a great idea." And I said, "Yeah, man, I got the business plan written up, and just I realized that I couldn't do this alone, right? So are you interested? He's like, yeah, that's definitely something we can do. Let's establish ourselves. And he did. He established himself. I established myself. And we ended up starting our own business, eFit Village. And we now run multiple three-quarter housing where we house individuals that are transitioning both from prison or treatment to help them get back into society. Yeah, and I remember we're going on our second year, October. It's funny how it happened. One day we were actually managing another home, and we were about to get displaced. And I remember my partner, because he's now my business partner, Kalani, and he's like, I'm ready. I said, okay, let's do it. Right? Because he was frustrated because we had opened one facility and did it well. Then the owner of that facility asked us to do it again. We did that well. And he was getting ready to do it again. And he's like, man, we could do this for ourselves. He's like, I'm ready. I said, perfect, let's do it. And we jumped in head first, right? And it's been successful. And this is our second year in operation. And it's been an awesome experience because I get to deal with individuals that were like me, right, in these specialty core programs. And I interact with them, and we get to sit down, break bread with them. And when they come with their hangups or their hurts, you can relate to them. And then when they realize that you went through what they're going through, you see the light bulb go on. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, I can do this. It's like, yeah, you can. I did it. Right? He did it. We both did it. And when they come like, oh, it's because you don't understand. Like, I was there. Like, I was literally there. Like, yeah. I do understand. Now, here's what we have to help, but you got to want it. Mm-hmm. Right? And we've been fortunate to meet some amazing people. And Kalani is an amazing partner, best friend. He's soon to be best man at my wedding, right?
Congratulations on that as well.
Thank you. So it's been a great experience, and it's the same vision I shared with you, right? When after that CrossFit session with John, I was like, I want to do three-quarter housing, and here we are 2 years into it.
And you're doing it, man.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
To see it come full circle. I love that we're coming back to this because I did want to highlight that. That's the vision that you shared.
Right.
And you're doing it, man.
And I have to, it's like screaming in my head to say this to you because as gritty, resilient people, a lot of times we don't see our successes because we're like on to the next thing, right? And going all the way back to the story with your dad telling you, no, you need to be more successful than me. And you misinterpreting that or interpreting that however you did in your mind at that young age. And then going after those drug dealers, those were the successful people in your mind that you needed or you thought at that time that you needed to emulate in order to make your father proud or to be successful. But little did you know, right? Because it's like hindsight is 20/20. Little did you know at that time, this was setting you up.
Right.
For all of these years, you had to go through all of that to become the success, to do what you were meant to do, full circle, what you're doing now, sitting in that prison cell thinking like, I was never a success. I never made myself proud, but that was all setting you up for this. Like I have chills thinking about how full circle that is. And that's not only like, I know your dad's proud of you now, and I hope that you're proud of yourself for what you've done. That's a lesson for everybody to take away because in our moments of pain, that's where we can use that to connect with people. Some buttoned up, person who's running, let's say a rehab facility or a house just to make money, they're not going to connect with the people in the way that you can, and they can change their lives the way you did. And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're not just a credible messenger, you're a credible leader. I feel fortunate to call you a friend.
Thank you. Likewise. Yeah.
Man, and I am so excited to see what your next success is.
Yes.
Because I know that vision just continues to expand. I'm excited to be on this journey with you. I think it's going to take us on a few more hikes, a few more mountaintops along the way.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I'm excited for all of that. It's been great having you here in the studio.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you. I know that we've got all your info. We're going to blast
Yes.
that out. We even got your number on here. So
Yes.
anybody that's looking in the Las Vegas area to get into 3-quarter housing,
Please.
this is where you want to be. This
Definitely.
is definitely it. So we want to give you a big shout out. Thank you for coming in today.
Absolutely.
It's been another incredible episode of Gritability. I'm your podcast host, Adam Clausen, Ro Clausen, Jonathan Machado, signing off. We'll see you back here on the next episode.
Bye, guys.